Good morning, and what a beautiful morning it is here in Troy, Ohio at the Mima Valley Veterans Museum. We are opening a 3-day event here, and it is called Troops in Town, Then and Now. So I would like for you to go with me. My name is Ann Adams, on a journey through all of our events that we are having these next 3 days. Today, first thing, I would like to introduce you to Mike Haynes to let him explain to you a little bit about his beautiful vintage vehicle.
Hi, this is my 1942 Dodge WC-51 weapon carrier. I've had it about a year and a half, just completed a cosmetic restoration of it. These trucks were used in a variety of roles. It had a lot of utility. It could be pretty much a workhorse, carry troops or ammo, supplies, whatever was needed. They're not quite as famous as the Jeep, but they are every bit as important as the Jeep was, and they're seen quite a bit throughout the war.
Moving on to another vehicle that is of great interest in our history is a 1944 LCVP known as the Higgins boat. A little about these Higgins boats. They were designed and built for the invasion of Normandy by Andrew Higgins. And these boats were carried on an LST, which is a 325-foot vessel that the front doors, bow doors open, and you've probably seen them on different shows or advertisements, and the bow drops down and they offload tanks and Jeeps off of the front of the LSTs. These small boats hung on the LSTs, and on the morning of 6th of June, they were lowered down on the sides of the ship, and the troops all climbed over the side of the ship down a ladder called a Jacob's ladder, and they jumped down into the boats. If you recall, during the history of, the waters were rough that morning, and so the Higgins boats and the LSTs were hitting against each other. So when the troops all jumped from the Jacob's ladder down into the boats, they had to count 1, 2, 3, and jump when they were close and not going away so that they could get down into the boat. These small boats is what carried 36 troops to the shores of Normandy on that dreadful day. So I just wanted to share a little bit of the history of what these small boats were used for during World War II, and they were designed for World War II, but they carried on to Korea. And in the 60s, they redesigned them into fiberglass, and they carried on for Vietnam. And I am here today to introduce to you a co-owner of the Higgins boat, Kenny Adams.
I'm Kenny. Like my sister says, I'm part owner of this Higgins boat. This particular boat is one of the last boats built by the Higgins Industries in New Orleans. The owner of it bought it from the United States Navy at the end of World War II in 1947. He had it railroad lifted, shipped to Verona, Illinois at his own expense, about $600. Took 6 months to get it there. When they got it to the little town on a railroad, they put rails down and skidded it off onto a semi-trailer. They took the semi-trailer to the gentleman's farm. They hand dug a hole in the ground that the semi-trailer backed in to slide the boat off onto the ground. The boat weighs 10 tons, so it was a pretty good undertaking. Then he built a building over the top of the boat. Some years later, when he was 60 years old, he died of a heart attack. The boat was still in the building. His son took it over. Their mission was to use it as a family pleasure boat up and down the Illinois River. Sometime later, when his son turned 60 years old, his son also died of a heart attack. That son's daughter sold that boat to us, and we brought it back to Ohio by the way of a military semi-trailer. So that's kind of a brief history of how the boat got to here. This boat has the original floorboards in it. they're cleated, so the jeeps and the soldiers had footing. You can't find original cleated in the bottom. It has a little sticker on the side. We put a glass cover over that has the data number for the drawings as it went down the assembly line. The boat was in 2000 from a Chicago marine company through a marine survey, was surveyed that took 3 days. The authenticity of the boat was made by that marine surveyor. It has the stamp in the deck below the floor level on the bilge, the number of the boat. They documented war damage. This boat sat with hundreds of other boats in Biloxi when the guy bought it, and the boats all had numbers on them, and you bid on a number. This particular boat had a hole in the side of the engine that had been repaired by the United States Navy, and that was also documented by this marine surveyor. So it was used. Other than that, it's got a gray marine engine in it. It runs good. We've had it in the water up in Conneaut, Ohio. It's been on display at the IX Center in Cleveland, in the middle of a huge building where they rebuilt and made B-29s airplanes. That's the story on the Higgins boat.
Also today at the Mima Valley Veterans Museum here in Troy, Ohio, we have a very interesting display with the 101st Airborne reenactors. Today I would like to introduce to you Dennis Sullivan. He's a part of that reenactors group, and he can explain some things to you about them.
I am the company commander of the 3rd Battalion of I Company in the 101st Airborne Division. In front of me here you'll see some artifacts from the era, including the Browning 1919 30 caliber machine gun, some rocket launchers, some people know them as bazookas, and we also have some German weapons over here as well. Our mission is to keep the history alive of the veterans of World War II and the sacrifices that they made. The 101st was slated to participate in the D-Day invasion. That was their primary mission when they came over from the United States into England, and they trained approximately 2 years for that task. So they were one of 3 divisions that jumped into Normandy at about midnight to 2 o'clock in the morning on June the 6th, 1944. There was also the American 82nd Division, and a British Airborne Division jumped as well. In addition to jumping by parachute, there was also glider infantry, which they arrived on or around the dawn of June the 6th. There weren't enough gliders to go around for the entire 327th Regiment to come in, so many of them came ashore on Utah Beach, along as regular infantry with the 4th Infantry Division, and the parachute infantry regiments and the glider infantry regiments would rendezvous and regroup and supply. The 101st objectives in D-Day was to seize a series of bridges and causeways and to seize an artillery battery called the XYZ complex to prevent them from shelling the beaches on D-Day. Things didn't go very well. There was a lot of confusion in the initial drop. Many paratroopers were misdropped and were miles from their landing zones. But they were strongly encouraged to take initiative, to take action on their own. So you would have one or sometimes small groups of people, of paratroopers, trying to proceed to their objectives, or if they couldn't find their objectives, they would create havoc and confusion as much as they possibly could against the German forces. Sometimes you would have 2 or 3 officers together that were separated from their men. Sometimes you would have a private or corporal or sergeant running an entire platoon of men until things got organized some days after D-Day. There was an expectation of about 70% casualty rates of the airborne forces on D-Day. Fortunately, the casualty rates, although were high, were lower than that, and the 101st accomplished all of their objectives on D-Day. They were supposed to be there no more than 3 days after D-Day, but they weren't relieved and returned to England until the end of July. Some of the armaments that we have here is, I will call it what it's usually known as by a majority of people that grew up in the area, bazookas, which was some type of musical instrument used in the 1930s that resembled this. It had a 2.36 rocket. This was actually anti-armor defense and anti-vehicle. Actually against the German tanks overall was not very effective unless you were lucky enough to get into the side or behind the enemy tank. Here you'll see a folded version earmarked for airborne forces, but other regular infantry forces used them as well. Used the same size rocket. It was made to break in two to make jumping with it easier from the airplane. You can quite imagine the potential hazards of jumping out of this in combat, especially at night when you're not quite sure where the ground is going to be. And sometimes they would pack these things away in drop bundles, which were carried in the airplane that they would push out, that had a parachute attached to it right before the troops jumped, or they were attached to the bottoms of the C-47 aircraft wings themselves, and they would drop them as well. Okay, we have some German armaments here. This one in particular is a German MP-44. This was a standard rifle cartridge for the bolt-action German Mauser, and this is a standard cartridge for the American M1 Garand semi-automatic rifle. In battle, they wanted to have a rifle that could fire either semi-automatic or fully automatic, and they found out over time the cartridges I showed you had ranges up to and including a mile. They found out in most battles you don't need that kind of a range. So they made an intermediate cartridge for this rifle. It's called, in German, Sturmgewehr, MP-44. Now, it could carry a 30-round magazine, could fire either semi-automatic or full automatic, and was quite advanced for the time. A lot of people mistake this for a Russian Kalashnikov AK-47, as it does resemble it somewhat. Actually very much ahead of its time. It was not produced in sufficient numbers to really make a difference in the war, but it was used for those troops that could get their hands on them. American troops called it the Buck Rogers rifle because it looked so futuristic. Actually, the reason why it wasn't produced in huge numbers is Adolf Hitler didn't think it was necessary to have a rifle like that. So those in command kind of circumvented his order and said, this is not a rifle, this is a machine pistol, much like the German machine pistol MP-40, which fired a 9mm pistol cartridge. This, of course, fired the intermediate rifle cartridge, but to push their agenda and not have Hitler make any inquiries, they gave it the designation MP for machine pistol. And apparently no one in the high command really had that big of a problem with a new machine pistol.
My name is Richard Nybert, and I am a Revolutionary War soldier. This is the Revolutionary War uniform. Let me move back so you can see. You have the breeches, waistcoat, shirt, and you put your full coat on afterwards, which is very hot because it's wool. And then you have your cocked hat. It's called a cocked hat because you don't wear it straight. It's cocked a little bit to the side. This is the cartridge box that you carried your cartridges, and you went over your shoulder. And there's where you made your cartridges, and then you put them in the box and kept them in the box. And you have your musket. This is a 69 caliber flintlock. It's a fairly good sized weapon. 69 caliber, it shoots a pretty good sized ball. And then there's a bayonet, and I have a bayonet for the musket that goes on the end of the bit. So you can see what it looks like. You don't very often ever see one with a bayonet on it. So that is something that people always like to see. And what we also do here is we make some cartridges, which is what I started to do here. You use a paper tube, and then you insert your powder down inside the cartridge, and you have a piece of paper you put down in there also, and then you tie it up and cut it off, and when you're ready to fire, you just bite it, tear the end of it off, and dump it in the gun. Take out your ramrod and ram it down, and put your powder in your pan. In your pan here, and then close it and fire it. That sets off the powder here, which sets off the powder in the barrel, and hopefully your ball goes down the range.
Hello, welcome to our very special opportunity to speak with Judy Dieter today, President of the Troy Historical Society. And we are privileged to be at the Miami Valley Veterans Museum on this very special weekend known as the 9/11 Remembrance. So as we turn to Judy here, again, President of the Troy Historical Society. Judy, would you tell us what your position there entails?
Well, what I do is to organize the meetings. I work with volunteers to make sure that our purpose is to educate the public about the history of Troy. And so I write things for the newsletters, as well as we have a Troy Alliance, and I write things for them. So mine is to make sure the organization is working properly. We work with the Troy-Miami County Public Library, and we operate a research center, the Local History Library, which is at 100 West Main Street in downtown Troy. And so we make sure that there are books, collectibles, pictures, both artifacts and things that will represent the history of Troy in the library. So we work very closely with the library staff.
And she mentioned the newsletter. I'm going to just hold this up briefly here. And these come out quarterly, do they? I notice this is the spring edition.
They should. We're a little behind. With COVID,
Certainly.
we're a little bit behind.
Judy is a very busy and talented lady here to take all these different aspects. Judy, we are here again, like I mentioned, on this weekend, this incredibly weekend of remembrance. And just a few comments, if you would, share on your observation of this weekend and what it means to people of all ages.
Well, we try to tell the story both to the young and to the old. People who have been born around the time of 2001 don't know the story as well and don't feel the things that happened that day. So our job is to, and there have been moments in history, we call them points in history where the world seems to change. We want to tell that story about how the world changed. Some of us lived through that and others didn't. You can compare it to the people who were here during Pearl Harbor. They remember where they were and what they were doing at that time. And most of us know what we were doing on September 11th, 2001. We can think back and we know that. So we are telling historical stories and what people went through, what our grandfathers went through, or during the Great Depression, World War II, the emotions that they felt. And so this point in history today and tomorrow, this weekend, we're going to reflect back of who we were and where we have come from since that time.
Now, as a citizen of Troy,
Yes?
and a person who appreciates the city and so forth, what do you have to say about how this has been organized and what's available from your point of view?
I think it's been very well organized that we have been allowed to come out here and tell our military history story. Most of the things which we have here today are stories of people who have served down through our 200-year history here in Troy. And so we're going to tell that story of our military history. That's what we're telling today. And of course, our history of those who served includes the firefighters, policemen, all those servants. We sometimes forget about people who gave part of their lives. Some gave all, as we say.
That's right.
But we're going to look back at the people who passed away on 9/11 and how we can remember them.
And Troy seems to be unique in what we've been privileged to have here. The exhibits downtown,
Yes.
with the 9/11 exhibit, the mobile exhibit.
We are very lucky to have that exhibit. I mean, there's a lot of communities that are envious of Troy for that. And I mean, it's to tell the story of what happened on that horrible, horrible day, and to see it and give people today an appreciation of what happened. We've somewhat forgotten in some ways. Some of the people don't seem to recognize the horror we felt that day.
I think we're proud and patriotic, and
We are.
we have a great deal of love and affection for those who we did not even know,
Yes.
but we know gave all. Certainly did.
We tell the story. Sometimes we have a flag here. It's a 48 star, 15 foot. It's a 10 by 5 foot flag. That flag was given to us by a cousin of a man who was killed in 1943. He and 9 others were training, and we don't know that much about what happened to him. His name was Robert Wick. He grew up here in Troy. He was born here in 1919. And when he was in 1933, the family moved to Tucson, Arizona. He was on a flight. Some people say it was a secret flight that they were doing for the government that day. He was 24 years old when he was killed. But that flag reminds us of one person, Robert Wick, and the sacrifice that he gave.
He gave it all.
He gave it all. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Judy. We
You're welcome.
appreciate your time with us. Again, we're at the Miami Valley Veterans Museum on this incredibly unique weekend of the 9/11 remembrance. The opportunities to serve have been shown through the heroic measure of so many people, both the civilian police and fire, and of course our soldiers themselves. Thank you very much, Judy.
You're welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Glad.
Hi, I'm Shelley Shane, and I'm out here today at the Miami Valley Veterans Museum in Troy, Ohio, and I'm representing the U.S. Sanitation Commission during the Civil War. Ladies would get together and they would produce lint and Sharpie and make bandages, collect goods, all that kind of stuff to gather to send to the front to the soldiers that they were missing at the time. Later on, the Sanitation Commission come to make hospitals and have nursing staff and provide that kind of stuff on the front. And they would hold large fairs, and they would gather up huge amounts of supplies and send them over there. At the end of the war, they decommissioned, and some of the ladies went on to then help the soldiers file for pensions, move into soldiers' homes, retirement homes, things like that, and help them along with life. And so that's what I'm out here today representing.
Hi, I'm Rex Maggart, and I'm portraying a soldier from the Civil War time period from Troy, Ohio. And when the war started, many of the soldiers had ideas the war would be over in about 3 months or less. But once we got into the war, it changed drastically. And a private's life might have been carrying his gun, foraging for apples, eating hardtack, and of course, most of the time we were marching anywhere from 12 to 25 miles a day. And we had to supply ourselves and keep our food in check and keep ourselves healthy. Most soldiers were dying at a pretty quick rate from disease, not the bullet. The bullet killed about a third of the Army, 625,000, I think, for the whole war. But most of that was from disease. So our lives were carrying this, building our pup tent in the back, and building our winter camps, and we would use some logs and some tools to cut trees down and make a winter camp, and that's how we would survive in the winter time. And we did this for about 4 years. Charles Smith, one soldier in the war, said in his diary that he traveled 2,500 miles before the war was over. So that's the life of a private.
Wow, what a wonderful day we had today. The first day, this is the end of today's Troops in Town, then and now at the Miami Valley Veterans Museum here in Troy, Ohio. I would like to thank everyone for coming out and joining us today and learning about our past history. It was great to see you. I hope to see you back tomorrow morning. We're going to start all over with new programs and new events.